I never thought a simple scarecrow would spark an all-out war with my neighbor, but that's exactly what happened. It started when Karen, that asterisk kind of Karen, kept driving across the edge of my field, knocking over the scarecrow I built to protect my crops. I asked her nicely to stop, more than once, but every time she'd come back, tires spinning, and smash it down like it was a game. I was tired of rebuilding it from scratch, so I decided to try something different, something that could actually stand up to her nonsense. I swapped out the wood for steel pipes and made it look just like before, harmless, but strong. The next morning, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, and watched as she came barreling down the path like always, only this time, things didn't go her way. What happened next? Well, let's just say she finally got the message. Let me back up a bit and explain how we even got here. I live on a small piece of land just outside town, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I've got a little garden, a few chickens, and a field I work hard to keep in shape. That scarecrow, it wasn't just for looks, it kept the crows off my crops, and it had sentimental value too. My grandpa helped me build the first one. Then Karen moved in next door. From the start, she acted like my land was hers to do whatever she wanted with. She cut across it in her SUV to save a few seconds getting to her driveway, even when it was muddy and soft. Every time I fixed the scarecrow, she'd run it down again. It was like some weird power game. I tried to be civil, but she didn't care. And that's when I knew something had to change. After the third time she smashed it, I walked over to her place to talk things out, thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding. She opened the door, gave me that fake smile, and said, "It's just a scarecrow. Maybe don't put junk so close to the property line." My scarecrow was a good 10 feet inside my boundary. I realized then, she wasn't just careless, she was doing it on purpose. I started documenting everything. Took photos of the tire tracks, the broken frame, even caught her once on my trail cam, laughing as she rolled over it. I showed the footage to the local sheriff, but he said it was a civil matter. That stung. She knew no one was going to stop her. Around that time, I started hearing whispers from neighbors too. Turns out, I wasn't the only one dealing with her. Broken fences, nasty notes, loud complaints, she had a whole pattern. This was personal now. So I got to work, quietly. I rebuilt the scarecrow, but this time, I used heavy-duty steel pipes for the frame, bolted them deep into the ground, and covered it with the same old clothes and straw so it looked harmless. I even scuffed it up a bit so it looked like it had been through some weather. From a distance, it was just the same old scarecrow she'd always targeted. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done, not even my buddy Dave, who usually helps me with farm stuff. I wanted everything to look exactly the same, like nothing had changed. The next few days, I kept seeing Karen pacing along her porch, eyeing my field. She hadn't come through yet, but I could feel it building. Then one early morning, just as the sun started peeking over the trees, I heard that familiar engine roar and tires crunching gravel. I grabbed my coffee and stepped onto the porch. This was it. She came flying down the gravel like a scene out of a movie, tires spinning, dust cloud trailing behind her SUV. But right before she reached the scarecrow, something changed. She suddenly veered off to the left, missing it completely, and drove straight into my fence. I was stunned. That's when I noticed a second vehicle creeping behind her, slow and steady. It was a code enforcement truck. I hadn't called them, but someone had. A neighbor, maybe. Or someone else she'd pushed too far. As she stumbled out of her SUV, yelling and pointing at my field like I'd set some kind of trap, the officer calmly stepped out and started asking questions. Meanwhile, the scarecrow stood tall, untouched. But then I saw her glance at the trail cam mounted on my shed. She knew I had proof. What I didn't expect, though, was what the officer said next, and that's when everything took an unexpected turn. The officer looked at Karen, then at me, and said, "We've had multiple complaints from this area. Seems like this has been going on for a while." Karen immediately started ranting about how I had built a weaponized scarecrow, and set her up. But the officer just raised an eyebrow and asked, "Ma'am, did anyone force you to drive onto his property?" She went quiet. I handed over the trail cam footage, dates, times, full audio. The officer watched it all, then turned back to her. "You've been warned before, haven't you?" She muttered something under her breath, but it was too late. She got cited for property damage and trespassing. I thought that was the end of it, finally some peace. But a few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from her, but from her husband. Turns out he owns the property, not Karen. And he wasn't just apologizing, he wanted to meet. Alone. A week later, I met her husband at the edge of the field. He showed up calm, holding coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. "I'm sorry," he said right away. "She's been making things hard for everyone, including me." Turns out, he'd been dealing with her behavior for a while and didn't even know how bad it had gotten with the neighbors. He handed me the folder. It had a formal agreement stating she wouldn't come near my property again. He even offered to cover the cost of my broken fence and repairs to the field. I accepted, shook his hand, and for the first time in a long time, the farm finally felt quiet. No more SUV tracks, no more shouting, just me, my crops, and the strongest scarecrow in the county. Sometimes, standing your ground doesn't mean fighting back. It just means being smart enough to let the truth do the heavy lifting. We stood there for a while, just talking. Karen's husband wasn't what I expected. He was calm, thoughtful, and honestly embarrassed by the whole situation. He said she'd been acting out more and more lately, not just with me, but around the whole neighborhood. He just never realized how bad it had gotten until he saw the footage I sent with my complaint. He didn't make excuses, though. He owned it and promised to make things right. The agreement he gave me had everything in writing. She wouldn't step foot on my land again, and if she did, there'd be legal consequences. He even offered to pay for new fencing and repairs to the soil where her SUV had dug in over time. The next few days were quiet. For the first time in months, I could work my land in peace. My chickens were calmer, the crops undisturbed, and the scarecrow, my steel-framed, straw-covered guardian, stood tall like a symbol of not giving in. I fixed the fence, planted new seeds, and got back to doing what I loved. Word got around the neighborhood fast. A few folks stopped by to thank me, saying they'd dealt with Karen too, but didn't know how to handle it. That felt good. It wasn't just about my scarecrow anymore. It was about finally standing up to the kind of person who thought rules didn't apply to them, and doing it without turning it into a bigger mess. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't let anger take over. I could have escalated it, sure, but instead, I chose patience, a little strategy, and a whole lot of steel. Sometimes that's what it takes to protect your peace. So yeah, if there's one thing I learned from this crazy scarecrow saga, it's this. Don't let people push you around just because they can. Stand firm, stay smart, and if all else fails, make sure your scarecrow can take a hit.